A man stood at my counter and asked for the key to room 214. He said his wife was upstairs, resting, and had sent him down because she did not want to be disturbed. I had checked her in myself 6 hours earlier, alone. No husband, no luggage for two, nothing on the reservation but her name. And I had watched her walk out through those front doors around 2 in the afternoon by herself, and I had not seen her come back. I told him I could not give him the key. He asked for my manager. My manager told me to hand it over. I still said no. She fired me right there in front of the whole lobby, with him standing 3 feet away, watching. I still did not give him that key. Before I keep going, I want to say something to whoever is watching this. If you have ever noticed something nobody else could see and had to decide whether it was worth losing everything to say something about it, this channel is for you. I put up a story like this every week about ordinary people who paid a real price for trusting what they knew before anyone else believed them. If that sounds like you, hit subscribe. It genuinely helps more than you would think. Okay, let me take you back to that afternoon. My name is Renee Castellano, and at the time, I was the front desk clerk at a place called the Blackwood, a mid-sized hotel downtown, the kind of building with a lobby that still had real marble on the floor and a fountain nobody had turned on since before I was hired. It was not glamorous work. Most of my shift was spent handing out towel vouchers and telling people the pool closed at 10, but I liked it in a strange way. I liked watching people come through those doors and being able to guess, within about a minute, what kind of stay they were about to have. The woman in 214 checked in a little after 8 that morning. She gave her name as Lauren Adler, paid with a card under that same name, and asked for a room on a high floor, away from the elevator, asking twice in slightly different ways, as if she needed to hear me confirm it out loud both times. She seemed tired in a way that had nothing to do with travel. Worn down, tired. She had one soft-sided suitcase, the kind you carry on a plane, and a canvas tote bag she kept looped over her shoulder the entire time, even while she signed the registration card. I did not think much of any of that at 8 in the morning. Hotels are full of tired people. What I did notice, because it was slow and I had nothing else to do, was that she came back down to the lobby around 11, sat in one of the chairs near the fountain for almost 20 minutes without ordering anything from the little cafe cart, and kept checking her phone in a way that did not look like she was reading messages. It looked like she was checking whether the screen had lit up at all. Then she went back upstairs. Around 1:30, she came down again and asked whether the hotel had a business center, somewhere private she could make a call. I told her we had a small room off the mezzanine with a desk and a phone line, mostly unused since everyone carries a cell now. She thanked me and went up there instead of using her own phone, which struck me as strange in the moment, but not strange enough to hold on to. Maybe her battery was low. Maybe she wanted a landline for privacy, since a hotel phone does not show your number. She was gone about 15 minutes. When she came back through the lobby, she did not stop at the desk. She walked straight toward the front doors, and I only really registered her because of the tote bag. It was empty, not folded, flat empty, but visibly lighter, hanging differently off her shoulder than it had that morning. Like whatever had been inside, it was gone. I did not think anything was wrong. I thought she had left something in her room and was heading out for the afternoon. It was 2 in the afternoon exactly, because I remember glancing at the clock right as the doors swung shut behind her. That was the last time I saw Lauren Adler. I want to be honest about something, because this story only works if I am honest about it. At 2 in the afternoon, none of that meant anything to me. A guest leaving her hotel to go for a walk or to a meeting is not news. My job was the front desk, not surveillance. Whatever came later did not come from some instinct that hit me all at once. It came from a slow accumulation of small things that individually meant nothing and only started meaning something once a man walked in 6 hours later and told me a story that did not fit. The man came in a little before 8 that evening, maybe 45, dressed in a gray suit that looked like it had been worn all day, and then slept in a car, tie loosened, top button undone. He came up to my counter with the kind of tired confidence you see in people who are used to being believed. He said his name was Thomas Adler, that his wife was in room 214, and that she had asked him to come down for an extra key because she did not want to be disturbed and did not want to answer the door herself. I asked him for identification. We do not hand out keys based on someone simply saying they belong to a guest, even a spouse. He produced a wallet and showed me a driver license with the last name Adler on it, matching the reservation. I looked at it for longer than I needed to, not because the name was wrong, but because something about the way he was standing bothered me before I could put words to why. He was not looking at me the way people look at a hotel clerk who is briefly standing between them and something they want. He was looking past me, toward the elevator bank in short glances, like he was timing something, and his hands resting on the edge of the counter were not still, not shaking exactly, tapping very lightly, one finger at a time, against the marble, in a rhythm that did not match anything he was saying out loud. I told him I needed to call up to the room to confirm with Mrs. Adler directly, since that was our policy for any second key request. He said that would not be necessary, that she was resting and did not want to be woken. I said I understood, but that I still needed to confirm. He repeated it, a little more firmly, that she did not want to be disturbed, and that surely I could simply hand him the key, since he had already shown me identification, proving he was her husband. That is where I made the decision that ended my shift. I picked up the desk phone and dialed the room anyway. It rang 4 times and went to nothing. No voicemail, no click, just the dead air a hotel phone makes when nobody answers and the system is not set up to catch the call. I hung up and told him I could not reach her, and that without confirming with the registered guest, I could not release a second key. His expression changed, just slightly, in a way I have thought about many times since. Not anger, something closer to recalibration, like a man realizing a plan needed a small adjustment. He said, more slowly now, that she was probably in the shower and asked whether I could simply check the room myself, confirm she was fine, and bring the key back down to him. That request should have felt reasonable. A guest cannot answer. Husband is standing right there with matching identification. Clerk offers to check on the room herself. It sounds sensible on paper, but something in the way he phrased it, sending someone else up instead of going himself and knocking on his own wife's supposed door, sat wrong with me in a way I could not yet explain, not even to myself. I told him I would need to speak with my manager about that. I called Diane Foster, who was working the evening in the office behind the desk, and asked her to come out. Diane had been running that hotel for 11 years. She was not the kind of manager who threw her weight around for the sake of it, and she was not someone who dismissed her staff without listening first. She listened calmly, looked at the man identification, heard the tote bag, detail I mentioned quietly while he was not paying attention, and made the call any experienced hotel manager would have made with the same information. A guest identity had been confirmed by government-issued ID matching the reservation name. An unanswered phone was not evidence of anything. There was no policy anywhere that required a hotel to treat a documented spouse as a threat, because a phone rang 4 times with no answer. She told me to issue the key. I said I could not do that. Diane repeated the instruction, and I could see in her face that she was not doing it to punish me. She was doing it because, from where she stood, with what she knew, refusing to hand a husband a key to his own wife room based on an empty tote bag and an unanswered phone was not a defensible position for a hotel to hold. She was right, by every normal measure, and I still said no. She told me, quietly, that if I could not follow a direct instruction in front of a guest, she would have no choice but to let me go, effective immediately. I remember the lobby around us, the sound of the fountain that was not running, the man standing 3 feet away with his hands finally still on the counter, watching this unfold like it was a show being put on for him. I remember thinking, very clearly, that I was about to lose the only steady job I had held in 2 years over a woman I had spoken to for maybe 90 seconds that morning. Diane fired me right there, and I still did not reach for the key drawer. For a few seconds after Diane said it, nobody moved. Thomas Adler did not smile, exactly, but something in his shoulders came down, like a held breath finally let go. He believed the problem was solved. A woman had been removed from between him and a locked door, and now there was simply a manager standing there who had already told her employee to hand over the key. Diane turned to me and held out her hand, palm up, waiting for me to place my badge and my key card into it. That is hotel procedure when someone is terminated on the spot. And I want to say I understood why she was doing it exactly the way she was doing it. She was not trying to humiliate me. She was trying to close the situation quickly, cleanly, in front of a guest, so that the guest could get what he needed and go back to his room, and everyone could move on with their night. I unclipped my badge from my blazer and set it on the counter instead of in her hand, because my hand would not stop shaking long enough to place it in hers without dropping it, and I did not want that small failure to be the last thing either of them saw me do. Diane reached past me, opened the key drawer herself, and pulled a spare card for room 214. She slid it across the counter to Thomas Adler. He picked it up, said something like a thank you, and turned toward the elevator bank without looking back at me even once. I remember watching his back as he walked away, the gray suit, the loosened tie, and I remember a specific detail that I did not think about consciously until much later that night. He did not walk toward the elevators the way a tired husband walks toward his wife after a long day. He walked fast, not sprinting, nothing that would have made anyone in that lobby look twice, but fast in the particular way people walk when they are trying very hard to look like they are not in a hurry. His stride was longer than his frame should have produced. I noticed it the same way you notice a picture hanging slightly crooked on a wall, a small wrongness you cannot immediately name. Diane asked me to gather my things from behind the desk and step into the back office so we could finish the paperwork. I did not move right away. I stood there, badge on the counter, watching the elevator doors close behind him, watching the numbers light up above the doors, 2, then rising, and something in my chest refused to accept that the night was simply going to continue on from here as if nothing had happened. There is a bank of monitors in the back office, 6 small screens showing different angles of the property, the lobby, the parking garage entrance, the 2 hallways on each guest floor, the loading dock behind the kitchen. Every clerk on shift glances at them from time to time, mostly out of boredom, mostly to make sure nobody is doing something they should not be doing near the ice machines. I had glanced at those screens dozens of times that day without really watching them, but once Diane and I were standing in that office and she was pulling up the termination form on her computer, I found myself staring past her shoulder at the second floor hallway feed, waiting. The elevator opened onto the second floor about 40 seconds later. Thomas Adler walked out of frame toward the 200 wing where 214 sat near the far end, past the ice machine, past a housekeeping cart someone had left against the wall. I watched him go, and for a moment, nothing about it looked unusual at all. A man walking down a hotel hallway toward a room. What made me stop breathing was what happened next, and I want to describe it exactly the way I saw it, because this is the detail that changed everything for me, the first piece of ground I actually had to stand on. He did not slow down as he approached the door. He did not fumble for the key card the way people usually do, patting a pocket, checking a wallet. He walked directly up to the door, already holding the card out in front of him, at exactly the height of the reader, like his hand had already done this motion enough times that it no longer needed to think about where the reader was. The light blinked green. The door opened. He went inside without pausing, without knocking first out of habit, without calling out her name the way you do when you walk into a hotel room where someone you love might be asleep. He simply walked in, and the door swung shut behind him. I said something out loud. I do not remember exactly what, some short exclamation, and Diane looked up from her computer and asked what was wrong. I told her to look at the second floor feed, and by the time she turned her chair toward the monitors, the hallway was empty again. The door to 214 closed, nothing moving. I tried to explain what I had just seen, and I could hear, even as the words were coming out of my mouth, how thin they sounded stacked up against what had already happened that evening. A man holding his key card out early is not evidence of anything. People do that all the time when they are in a hurry, when their hands are full, when they simply want to get into their room without breaking stride. Diane said as much, gently, not dismissively, the way you talk to someone you can tell is spiraling a little, and you do not want to make it worse by being sharp with them. She reminded me that she had already made her decision, that the identification had checked out, that a marriage was not something the hotel had any business investigating, and that whatever I thought I had seen on a grainy hallway camera was not something either of us could act on. I asked her, if she was so sure, to just walk up there with me and knock on the door, not to accuse anyone of anything, just to see Lauren Adler's face, hear her voice, confirm with our own eyes that she was resting comfortably in her own room with her own husband, the way he said. I told Diane I would apologize to both of them if that was what we found, that I would sign whatever paperwork she wanted, that I only needed 30 seconds standing outside that door. She looked at me for a long moment, and I could see her weighing it, the way a reasonable person weighs a request that costs almost nothing against a request they already believe is unnecessary. In the end, she said no. She said that going up there, now, after everything, after she had already told the guest the matter was resolved, would be an escalation the hotel could not justify, and that, if word ever got back to corporate that a fired employee had convinced her to go harass a guest in his room over an unanswered phone call, it would not reflect well on either of us. She was not wrong about that either. I want you to sit with that for a second, because it matters. Every single decision Diane made that night, from her perspective, with the information she had, was the responsible one. If I had been standing where she was standing, I do not know that I would have decided any differently, but I was not standing where she was standing. I was the one who had watched Lauren Adler check in alone that morning, watched her sit by a fountain, checking a phone that was not receiving anything, watched her carry a tote bag up to a room and bring it back down empty. Diane had walked into this 10 minutes ago. I had been carrying pieces of it all day without realizing they were pieces of anything. I asked her one more time if I could go up alone, just to knock, off the clock, on my own time, since I no longer technically worked there anyway. She said if I did that, she would have security escort me off the property, and she said it kindly, the way you say a hard thing to someone you actually like, because she did like me. I know that now looking back. She was not trying to punish me. She genuinely believed, with everything she knew, that I was overreacting to a strange coincidence, and that the kindest thing she could do was get me to go home before I made things worse for myself. I signed the termination paperwork with a pen that kept skipping because I was pressing down too hard. Diane walked me to the staff entrance around the side of the building, told me to take care of myself, and said, almost as an afterthought, that she hoped I would understand her decision someday. I told her I already understood it. I meant that. Understanding a decision and believing it is correct are two different things, and I was starting to realize that for the first time in my life that night, standing in a stairwell that smelled like cleaning chemicals and cold concrete, holding a small cardboard box with a phone charger and a spare cardigan in it, because apparently that was all I had accumulated at that desk in the time I had worked there. I did not go home. I want to be clear about that, because if you are watching this expecting the version of the story where the fired employee drives home, sits on her couch, and stares at the ceiling until she works up the courage to do something, that is not what happened. I stood in the alley behind the Blackwood for maybe 4 minutes, box in my arms, cold air moving through the gap between the buildings, and I thought about every single detail from that day in order, from the moment Lauren Adler first walked up to my counter that morning to the moment I watched a stranger let himself into her room with a key card held out in front of him like he had done it 100 times before. There was a diner across the street from the hotel, a place called Marion, open 24 hours, mostly used by people coming off overnight shifts. I walked in there instead of walking to my car, sat down in a booth by the window with a direct line of sight to the Blackwood front entrance, ordered a coffee I did not intend to drink, and pulled out my phone, not to call anyone yet, to write things down, the way you do when you are afraid your own memory is going to smooth over the details if you wait even 1 more hour, and you need to get them onto a page while they are still sharp and specific and true. I wrote everything down in the Notes app on my phone, in order, with times attached wherever I could remember them. 8 in the morning, check-in, alone. 2 requests about the floor. 11, lobby chair, phone that was not receiving anything. 1:30, business center instead of her own cell. 2, front doors, empty tote bag. 8 in the evening, husband at the counter, identification that matched, hands that would not stay still. Then the hallway camera, the key card already out before he reached the door. No knock, no name called out, the door closing behind him like the room already knew him. I sat with that list for a long time, coffee going cold in front of me, and I made myself ask the question honestly instead of emotionally. Was there a version of this where every single item on that list had an innocent explanation? Yes. Obviously, yes. Tired travelers act strange. Husbands and wives fight, and sometimes one of them uses a hotel, like a hiding place, from an argument neither of them wants to have in front of anyone. A man might know the exact height of a key card reader because he had already been up to that room earlier in the day before I ever saw him, on a trip I simply had not noticed. Every single item, taken alone, could be nothing. What kept pulling at me was not any one item. It was that none of the innocent explanations lined up with each other at the same time. If he had already been up to the room earlier that day, the front desk log would show it, because a key card only opens if it has been issued or reissued, and I had issued exactly 1 key that day, to Lauren Adler, at 8 in the morning, and 1 more, to him, at 8 that night. There was no gap in between where a second key could have been cut for a husband already staying there. So either he was working from memory of a room he had genuinely never opened before, which made the confidence in his hand strange in a different way, or he had gotten into that room some other way entirely, a way that did not run through my desk at all. I picked up my phone and called the non-emergency police line because I did not think what I had constituted an emergency, not in the sense that would justify dialing for a dispatch with lights and sirens. A woman answered after 4 rings and asked what I was reporting. I explained it as calmly as I could: the check-in, the missing husband on the reservation, the empty tote bag, the camera footage, trying to keep my voice level, even though my hands were doing exactly what Diane had watched them do at the front desk an hour earlier. The woman on the line was polite and clearly writing something down, but I could hear, underneath the politeness, the same shape of response Diane had given me. A guest is allowed to leave her hotel room. A husband matching identification is allowed to enter a room booked under his wife name without a reported crime, a missing persons report, or a request from the guest herself. There was nothing actionable for them to send someone out for. She told me I could file a welfare check request, but that it would likely take hours to be assigned on a slow night, longer on a busy one, and that if I had genuine concern about immediate danger, I should call back and report it as such. I almost hung up right there and told her, never mind. And then I thought about something I had not said out loud yet to anyone, not even to Diane, because I had not fully put it together myself until that exact moment sitting in that booth. When Lauren Adler checked in that morning, she paid with a card, but before she handed it to me, she paused, glanced at it in her own hand for a second, like she was checking which one she had grabbed out of her wallet. That is such a small thing. People carry more than one card, but something about the way she looked at it and then looked past me toward the doors before sliding it across the counter had stayed lodged in the back of my mind all day without my noticing it was still there. I told the woman on the phone about the card, about the glance toward the doors, about all of it, and she said she would flag it as elevated and get someone out there as soon as a unit was available, but she could not promise how soon that would be. I thanked her and hung up, and I sat in that booth with the phone in both hands, staring across the street at the Blackwood front doors, lit up gold against the dark street, looking exactly the way it had looked every single night I had worked there, like nothing behind those glass doors could ever be wrong. This is the part where I want to ask you something, because I have never been able to answer it cleanly myself. Not whether you have ever been sure of something before you had proof. I want to know something more specific than that. Has there ever been a moment where you had already done the responsible thing, already called the right number, already said the true thing to the person who was supposed to listen, and it still was not enough, and you had to decide right there whether to go do something yourself that nobody had given you permission to do? Put it in the comments if that has happened to you. I am asking because I did not know, sitting in that diner, whether what I was about to do made me brave or just made me someone who could not let go of a feeling. While I was still staring at the hotel entrance, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Marcus, a bellhop who had worked at the Blackwood almost as long as I had, one of the only people there I would have called a real friend, rather than just a coworker. Diane must have told the rest of the staff I had been let go, because his message just said, "Are you okay? Heard what happened? Want me to bring you your jacket? You left it in the break room." I told him I was fine, that I would come get it another time, and then, because I could not stop myself, I asked him a question I had no right to ask a working employee to answer for me. I asked whether he could quietly check the phone log for room 214, whether there was any record of an outbound call from that room or from the business center line sometime around 1:30 or 2 that afternoon, and if so, what number it had gone to. He did not answer right away, and I sat there watching the 3 dots appear and disappear on my screen 4 or 5 times, which told me he was typing something, deleting it, typing it again, The way you do when you know you are about to do something you are not supposed to do, and you are trying to decide if the person asking is worth the risk. Finally, the message came through. He said he could pull it up on the system from the concierge terminal since he still had access, but that if Diane found out he had looked at guest phone records for a fired employee, it could cost him his job too. And he wanted to know if this was actually serious or if I was just spinning out over a bad night. I looked back across the street one more time before I answered him, and that is when I saw it. The thing that made the rest of that night happen the way it did. A single figure came out through the front doors of the Blackwood, moving fast, head down, carrying nothing, not a bag, not a suitcase, nothing in his hands at all. It was Thomas Adler. He crossed the small circular drive in front of the hotel, walked past the parked cars near the entrance, and got into a dark sedan parked at the far curb, one that had not been there when I left the building less than 20 minutes earlier. He pulled away from the curb fast enough that I heard the tires from across the street, through the glass of the diner window, over the sound of a radio playing somewhere behind the counter. He had gone up to that room less than 20 minutes ago. He had told my manager his wife needed rest and privacy, and now he was leaving alone, empty-handed, in a car that had appeared out of nowhere while I was not watching the street, driving away from a hotel where his wife was supposedly still resting in bed on the second floor. I stood up out of that booth so fast I knocked my coffee cup onto its side, coffee spreading dark across the table, and I did not stop to grab napkins or apologize to anyone. I typed one word back to Marcus: "Yes, it is serious. Please check." And then I was already moving toward the diner door, phone still in my hand, watching the taillights of that sedan shrink down the street, thinking about a second-floor hallway, an empty room, and a woman I had spoken to for 90 seconds that morning, who I was now fairly certain nobody currently inside that building was checking on. I did not go back through the front doors. I went around to the staff entrance where Diane had walked me out less than an hour earlier, and I texted Marcus that I was standing outside it. He opened the door within a minute, still in his uniform vest, looking past me into the alley like he was checking whether anyone else had seen me come back. He had his personal phone in one hand and a folded printout in the other, and before I could say anything, he held the printout up between us and told me to read it before I said a word, because he wanted to watch my face when I got to the number. It was a call log from the business center line, pulled from the concierge terminal under his own login, which he told me twice was something he was not supposed to do for a guest who was not asking him to do it, and definitely not for a fired employee standing in an alley. The log showed one outbound call placed at 1:38 that afternoon, lasting 6 minutes and 12 seconds, to a local number with an area code that matched our city. Marcus had already looked the number up on his phone while he waited for me to arrive. It belonged to a crisis line, a non-profit organization that ran a 24-hour hotline for people trying to leave dangerous relationships, along with a small network of confidential shelters they helped place people into on short notice. I stood there in that alley and felt the entire day rearrange itself around that one piece of paper, the nervous checking of a phone that was not receiving anything because she was waiting to hear back from someone at that organization, not from anyone connected to the husband at all. The trip to the business center instead of using her own cell, because a call to a hotline like that leaves a record on a personal phone bill that an abuser can later find, and a hotel landline charge to the room does not, at least not in a way anyone checks, unless they go looking the way Marcus just had. The empty tote bag at 2 p.m, because she had not been carrying nothing out of that room. She had been carrying whatever she needed for a meeting she did not want, traced back to that hotel room, Documents, most likely. Maybe cash. Maybe both. The kind of things a person gathers quietly over days or weeks before they finally decide today is the day they leave. I asked Marcus if there was any way to tell whether Thomas Adler had been in that building earlier than 8 that evening, before I ever saw him at my counter. He said there was one way to check, and it made him visibly uncomfortable to even say it out loud, but he pulled up the key access log for room 214 anyway, scrolling past my own entry from 8 that morning, past nothing at all for hours, and then stopping on an entry time-stamped 11:51 that morning. A key had been reissued to that room under a manager override code, the kind used when a guest claims to have lost their card, and a supervisor authorizes a replacement without the guest needing to come down to the desk in person. I had not issued that override. I was working the desk the entire morning, and I remembered every single interaction I had that shift because there had been so few of them. Whoever authorized that reissue had done it from a terminal in the back office, not from the front counter, sometime while I was occupied elsewhere, most likely during the 20 minutes I had spent restocking the housekeeping supply closet around 11:40, a task Diane had asked me to do that same morning, which meant the front desk had sat unattended for exactly the window in which someone walked in, claimed to be locked out of 214, and walked away with a working key to a room that was not theirs. 11:51, 9 minutes before noon, and Lauren Adler had come down to the lobby at 11, sat by the fountain checking a phone for almost 20 minutes, and gone back upstairs sometime before I returned to the desk, which meant that somewhere in that overlapping window, a man had gotten a key to her room while she was either still up there or on her way back up to it, and I had been in a supply closet folding towels while it happened 3 feet from where I should have been standing. I asked Marcus who had authorized the override. He hesitated, and I watched him decide, standing right there in that alley, whether telling me was worth whatever it might cost him. He turned the printout around and pointed at a 2-letter staff code in the corner of the log entry. It was not Diane. It was a code belonging to a part-time desk clerk named Priya, who Marcus said had left for the day at 11 that morning, before the override was even logged, which meant either the timestamp was wrong or someone had used her terminal after she left without logging out first, which happened more often than anyone liked to admit, because the system only automatically logged a person out after 20 minutes of inactivity, and Priya was known for leaving her station open when she stepped out. I want to be honest with you about what that detail meant to me in the moment, because it is easy, telling a story after the fact, to make every piece slot together like the ending of a mystery novel. This piece did not slot together neatly. It complicated things instead of simplifying them, because if Thomas Adler had walked in, found an unattended terminal, and issued himself a key using a code that was not even his own, that was not the behavior of a worried husband who had simply lost track of his wife. That was the behavior of someone who already knew how that front desk worked, who knew when shifts changed, who knew the layout of that back office well enough to sit down at a terminal and generate a valid key without anyone noticing. On the very same day, his wife had checked in completely alone, with no advance notice that he would be joining her. That is not something a stranger figures out by accident in 9 minutes. That is something you know because you have been inside that building before, or because you have been watching it, or because you have been told exactly how it works by someone who trusted you with that information a long time ago, back before whatever had happened between him and Lauren Adler had turned into whatever this now was. I did not have all of it. I want to be clear about that, because I have never claimed I had the whole picture standing in that alley. I did not know her real story, whether Thomas Adler was, in fact, her husband at all, or an ex-husband, a former partner, someone whose name had simply never been changed on the paperwork that mattered. I did not know what she had walked out of that hotel to go do at 2 in the afternoon, whether she had made it to wherever she was going, whether the meeting with that crisis line had happened the way it was supposed to. What I had was this: a woman who had spent an entire day quietly trying to disappear from someone, and a man who had gotten into her locked hotel room 9 minutes before noon using a stolen access code, and then walked back into that same room 8 hours later, holding a key card out in front of him, like his hand already knew exactly where it was going, because it did. Marcus folded the printout back up and asked me, very quietly, standing there in the cold with the staff door propped open behind him, letting warm kitchen air spill out into the alley, what I wanted to do with this. He said if I wanted to go back inside and show it to Diane, he would come with me, even though it meant admitting he had pulled a guest phone and key log without authorization for someone who no longer worked there. He said that after everything he had just read, he did not think either of us could just go home and pretend we had not seen it. I told him yes. I told him we needed to find Diane right now, before that sedan came back, before whoever was supposed to be watching that hallway camera looked away for even one more unattended minute, because somewhere between an empty room on the second floor and a hotline call placed 6 hours earlier, there was a woman who might still be walking back toward that hotel right now, completely unaware that the man she had spent all day trying to get away from already knew exactly which door to open and exactly how to open it without anyone stopping him twice. Marcus and I went in through the staff entrance together and found Diane still in the back office, sitting at her desk with the termination form still open on her screen, the cursor blinking in an empty signature line she had probably been staring at since I left. She looked up when the door opened, and I could see her getting ready to say something firm about me being back on hotel property after being escorted out, before she noticed the printout in Marcus' hand and the expression on both of our faces. I did not waste time on an apology or an explanation of why I had come back. I put the call log down on her desk and told her to read the timestamp on the outbound call first, then the number, then the key override entry below it. I watched her go through it the same way I had gone through it in the alley, her eyes moving fast, her jaw setting, the color changing slightly in her face as she reached the 1151 entry and read the staff code that did not belong to anyone who should have generated it. She asked Marcus directly whether he had pulled guest records without authorization, and he said yes, and she told him they would deal with that separately later, and right now she needed him to get the hallway feed from that morning pulled up on the office monitors, the full window between 11:30 and noon, not just the log entry. It took him under 2 minutes to find it. The footage showed a man in a dark jacket walking into the back office hallway at 11:46, 4 minutes after I had gone into the supply closet, sitting down at the terminal, typing for roughly 90 seconds, and walking back out. The angle never caught his face clearly. It did not need to. The height, the build, the way he moved, all matched Thomas Adler exactly. Diane picked up her own phone and called the police line directly, not the non-emergency number I had used from the diner, but a direct line she had for situations exactly like this, one hotel managers keep for genuine emergencies rather than routine noise complaints. She gave them everything in under 90 seconds, flat and precise. The reissued key, the hotline number, the unattended terminal, a possible domestic violence situation involving a guest who may currently be in danger. I remember thinking, listening to her talk, that this was the same woman who had told me an hour earlier that none of it was actionable, and she was right both times, because an hour earlier, none of it was actionable. And now, with a printed log in her hand instead of a hunch in my voice, it very much was. She told Marcus to stay by the monitors and watch every camera angle we had for any sign of the sedan or of Thomas Adler on foot, and she told me, without a trace of the earlier firmness in her voice, to come with her up to 214, not because she needed my help, because I think, by that point, she understood I was not going to sit in that back office and wait, and she would rather have me next to her than wandering the building alone. The hallway on the second floor looked exactly like it had on the monitor an hour before, empty, quiet, the ice machine humming faintly near the far end, the same housekeeping cart still pushed against the wall that nobody had moved back to storage. Diane knocked on the door of 214, identified herself by name and title, and waited. Nothing. She used her master key. The room was empty, but not the way a room looks when someone has simply stepped out for the evening. The bed was still made from housekeeping that morning. A single suitcase sat closed on the luggage rack, zipped, untouched. On the desk by the window sat a phone charger with no phone attached to it, and next to it, a small velvet jewelry box, open, empty, the kind that usually holds a ring or a pair of earrings, sitting there like whoever had opened it had needed both hands free for something else and had not come back for it since. What told me the most was the closet. The hanger bar had exactly one empty hanger pushed to the far end, out of line with the rest, the metal hook slightly bent, the way a hanger looks when something is pulled off it quickly rather than lifted and set down. A winter coat, most likely, based on the season and the empty space where something bulky had clearly been hanging. Someone had come back into this room after 2 in the afternoon, after the tote bag, grabbed a coat, and left again fast enough to leave a jewelry box open and a hanger bent, but calm enough to leave the suitcase zipped and the bed untouched. Someone who was not panicking. Someone who was executing a plan she had clearly rehearsed in her head many times before that day ever started. Diane called down to Marcus and asked if the sedan had shown up on any exterior camera. It had, twice. Once at 9 that evening, pulling into the small side lot behind the parking garage, instead of the main entrance, sitting there for 6 minutes with its engine running before the driver got out and walked around to the front doors, which meant Thomas Adler had specifically avoided the cameras covering the main drive on his way in, choosing a blind approach a first-time visitor would not have known to use. And a second time, 11 minutes after he drove away from the front curb, the same sedan reappeared on the garage exit camera, this time slowing to a stop for almost a full minute at the mouth of the garage instead of continuing onto the street, engine idling, before finally turning and pulling away again. That is where the police found him. A patrol unit responding to the call from Diane located the sedan 4 blocks from the hotel, parked along a side street with a clear line of sight to the Blackwood main entrance, engine off, Thomas Adler sitting alone inside it. When they approached the vehicle, they found, in plain view on the passenger seat, a small black case about the size of a deck of cards, a magnetic GPS tracker, the battery still warm, recently removed from wherever it had been attached. Officers later confirmed it matched the make and model of a tracker, registered to an account under a name that was not Thomas Adler at all, an account that had been quietly logging a location every 4 minutes for the past 11 days, a location that traced, day after day, to an apartment 2 counties away that had nothing to do with any hotel, any wife, any marriage certificate on file, anywhere. The device had been recovered from the wheel well of a gray sedan parked 2 blocks from that apartment the previous week, according to a police report filed by a woman there under a different last name. A report that had never mentioned a Lauren Adler at all, because there had never been a Lauren Adler. Not really. Only a woman who had used that name for exactly one day at exactly one hotel to buy herself exactly enough time to get somewhere the tracker could no longer follow her. Lauren, or whatever her actual name was never in that hotel room after 2 in the afternoon. She had made the call to the hotline from our business center, met an advocate at a coffee shop 4 blocks away, and was already being driven by the time any of us were standing in that emptied room toward a shelter placement in another county. The same trip she had apparently been planning for 11 days, ever since discovering the tracker attached to her own car and quietly deciding not to remove it yet, not until she had somewhere safe enough to lead it away from. Thomas Adler, whose real name turned out to be something else entirely once the police ran him through the system, was arrested that night on an outstanding warrant from another state, unrelated to anything that had happened at the Blackwood, but discovered because a patrol unit had run his plates as a matter of routine once they pulled up behind that idling sedan. The tracker sat in an evidence bag with a case number written on white tape across the top by the time Diane and I made our way back down to the lobby a little after midnight. Diane did not say much to me while we waited for the officers to finish taking statements. She stood next to me near the fountain that had not run in years, arms crossed, staring at nothing in particular, and at one point she said quietly that she had made the only decision she could have made with what she knew, and that she still believed that, and that she also owed me an apology she was not entirely sure how to phrase yet. I told her she did not owe me one. I meant it. She had been reasonable the entire night. I had simply been standing somewhere she was not, watching things she had no way of seeing. 3 weeks later, I was back behind that same front desk, on the schedule again, this time with a manager override code of my own, one Diane assigned me herself without either of us saying much about why. It sits 2 lines down from hers in the staff directory, my name next to a 6-digit string I have never once had to use, because nobody has tried to walk an unattended terminal since. The velvet jewelry box from room 214 is still in a drawer in the back office, unclaimed, because nobody ever came back for it, and none of us have been able to figure out where to send it. I still think about her sometimes, whoever she really was. I hope she made it exactly where she was trying to go. If a story like this one stuck with you, I put up a new one every week. Ordinary people who paid a real price for trusting what they knew before anyone else believed them. I will see you in the next one.